Let me tell you something about humiliation. It doesn't arrive loud. It doesn't kick the door in. It walks in quietly wearing your father's cologne, and it shakes hands with the future you thought you had. I graduated summa cum laude from Yale School of Architecture, 3.9 GPA. Professors who called my portfolio exceptional, recommendations that should have opened every door in the industry, but none of that mattered. Because my father, Richard Lawson, had already made the calls, 31 of them, before I ever submitted my first application. And when I say he made the calls, I don't mean casually, I mean systematically, strategically. Like a man launching a campaign against his own daughter. You need to understand something. From the outside, we were perfect. 3 generations of architects in Hartford, Connecticut, colonial mansion, 4 acres, my father's Mercedes. My mother's Lexus, my sister Olivia's BMW, a graduation gift. Magazine features called us a dynasty. Charity galas called us generous, neighbors called us blessed, but behind closed doors, there was only one thing that mattered in the Lawson family: control. My father believed in legacy, not love, legacy, and in his mind, legacy had one rightful heir. Olivia, my younger sister, the golden child, groomed from childhood to inherit the firm. Meanwhile, I learned something very early. In our house, daughters had roles. Olivia was the future, I was negotiable. I was 14 the first time I understood my place. I overheard my father in the kitchen. "Daughters don't need to create," he said. "They need to marry well. Stephanie will be fine." I remember standing there in the hallway, frozen. That was the day I realized I wasn't being raised to build. I was being positioned, managed, but there was one person who saw me differently. My grandmother, Eleanor Lawson. She was the real architect in our bloodline. The industry didn't say that, but history does. She designed half the buildings that made my father famous, just under his name or her husband's, because in 1962 women didn't get credit, they got erased, but my grandmother kept records. Sketches, dates, letters, originals. Insurance, she called it, for when the truth needs to come out. The summer I turned 12, she gave me something: a brass key, safety deposit box, Hartford Savings Bank, box 1247. "Someday," she said, "you'll need a door your father cannot lock." I didn't understand then, but I kept that key hidden for 15 years, and I never forgot the number. Fast forward, graduation day, Yale courtyard. My name was called: Stephanie Marie Lawson, summa cum laude. I walked across that stage holding 6 years of work, 6 years of proving I was more than someone's daughter. And when I looked into the crowd, my father wasn't watching. He was talking business, already planning, already calculating. 3 days later, the first rejection email arrived: Whitmore Architecture Associates. After careful consideration, no interview, no phone call, no feedback. Just closed. I thought it was normal, competitive industry. I applied to 10 more firms, then 20, then 47. Every single one rejected me. Identical wording, identical tone, like they were reading from the same script. Because they were. 6 months later, my professor called me. He sounded uncomfortable. "Stephanie, someone has been warning firms about you." Warning, that word still makes my chest tighten. He told them I had a history of theft, that I was unreliable, that my family was handling a private situation. The older, well-connected industry veteran making those calls, my father. I remember sitting in my apartment after that call. The silence felt different. It wasn't confusion anymore, it was clarity. He wasn't disappointed in me. He was punishing me because I had said no. See, after graduation, he offered me a position at his firm, unpaid, working under Olivia, filing, admin work, supporting her leadership. Family apprenticeship, he called it. I called it a cage. When I refused, he smiled and said, "You'll regret this." That was the moment he declared war. I confronted him once, walked into his office, asked him directly, "You're calling them, aren't you?" He didn't deny it. He said he was pausing my career until I was ready to come home, humble, grateful, obedient. I asked him why he hated me. He said, "I don't hate you. I'm disappointed." I've learned something since then. Disappointment is just control dressed in softer language. My savings drained, rent was due, pride doesn't pay utility bills, so I got a job, Rosie's Diner, minimum wage. Coffee refills, grease stains, blisters, from Yale graduate to waitress in 8 months. That was my father's masterpiece. The first time he came into the diner, it wasn't accidental. He brought colleagues, sat in my section, introduced me loudly. My daughter, Yale graduate, prefers the service industry now. No tip, just a business card, 2 words on the back, last chance. He wanted me to break, cry, run, call him. I didn't. But here's what he didn't know: humiliation is pressure. And pressure does one of 2 things: it shatters you, or it forges you. And I wasn't done yet, because while he was making phone calls, my grandmother had been preparing something else. And I still had the key. 2 years passed, 2 years of serving tables, 2 years of designing at night in secret, 2 years of becoming invisible, until one evening an email arrived. Meridian Development Corporation. National Architecture Innovation Award. Finalist. Interview requested. 47 floors above Manhattan. And when I walked into that room, the CEO already knew my grandmother's name, and she had a folder with red wax. Broken. Waiting, but before I tell you what was inside that folder, you need to understand something. My father thought humiliation would bring me back to him. He thought isolation would break me. He thought I would crawl. He forgot one thing. I am Alina Lawson's granddaughter, and she never built exits without building consequences. In the next part, I'm going to tell you about the envelope, the safety deposit box, and the one document my father never thought I would see. There's a moment in every war when you realize you were never unarmed. You were just uninformed. And the day I walked into Hartford Savings Bank with a brass key in my hand, I stopped being the victim. It was raining that morning. Cold Connecticut rain, the kind that makes the sky feel lower. I had just finished a double shift at Rosie's. My back hurt. My feet were swollen. My pride had been sanded down to something quieter, sharper. And I couldn't stop thinking about Meridian, about that interview request, about the CEO who knew my grandmother's name, about the red wax seal in her folder. If my grandmother had prepared something, it was time to find out what. Hartford Savings Bank hadn't changed in 15 years. Same marble floors, same brass fixtures, same faint smell of paper and polished wood. I stood at the counter holding the key. Safety deposit box, I said. Number 1247. The banker looked at me politely. Do you have identification? I handed it over. My hands were steady. Inside, I was 12 years old again, standing on a rooftop while my grandmother pressed that key into my palm. When the time comes, she had said. The banker led me into the vault. Cold, quiet, sealed from the world. He unlocked the outer mechanism, then stepped back. You'll have privacy. And just like that, I was alone with whatever my grandmother had left behind. The box was heavier than I expected. I carried it to the small wooden table in the viewing room and sat down. For a second, I just stared at it. 15 years of waiting. Then I opened it. Inside were 3 things. A thick envelope sealed with red wax, a stack of documents bound in legal clips, and a smaller handwritten note, my grandmother's handwriting, elegant, controlled, precise. I opened the note first. Stephanie, it began. If you are reading this, then your father has already shown you who he is. I stopped breathing. You will want to fight him directly. Do not. Richard understands only power and he believes he owns it. Let him believe that. While he is watching doors, you will walk through walls. My throat tightened. I have documented everything, not because I wanted revenge, but because someday you would need leverage. Leverage, that word changed something inside me. I opened the legal documents, phone records, emails, copies of signed design drafts, her designs credited publicly to my father, original blueprints dated years before his supposed concept presentations. There were affidavits, witness statements, and then I saw it, a notarized letter from Alina Lawson, stating that she was the primary designer of several cornerstone projects attributed to Lawson and Partners, including the Morrison Cultural Center. The project that made my father's career. I leaned back in the chair. The vault felt smaller. This wasn't just documentation. This was dynamite, 40 years of buried truth. My grandmother hadn't just kept insurance. She had built a weapon, and she had left it to me. Then I opened the red wax envelope. This one was addressed to someone else. Catherine Monroe, CEO, Meridian Development Corporation. My heart pounded. Inside was a personal letter. Not legal, not formal, personal. My dear Catherine, it began. 40 years ago, you were the only student who saw me not as a relic but as an architect. My grandmother had mentored her, not publicly, not officially. But deeply, she had shaped her thinking, her resilience, her ambition, and at the bottom of the letter, one final request. If my granddaughter ever walks into your world alone, give her the opportunity I never had. Judge her work, not her last name. I sat there in silence, the diner grease under my fingernails, the Yale diploma framed on my apartment wall, the rejection emails, the humiliation, the blacklisting. He had tried to erase me. She had prepared me. There was one final document, a trust transfer, signed 18 months before she died, 20% ownership in a private design investment fund, valued at just over $3.4 million. My name listed as sole beneficiary, not my father, not Olivia, me. I laughed, not loudly, but sharply. For 2 years, my father thought he was starving me into submission. He didn't know I was financially insulated the entire time. My grandmother had funded my survival before I even knew I'd need it. I closed the box slowly, but I didn't feel powerful yet. I felt something else. Anger. Not loud anger, cold anger, strategic anger, because now I understood something important. My father hadn't just tried to control me, he had erased my grandmother, taken her legacy, built his empire on her silence. And then tried to silence me too. This wasn't about $3,000. This wasn't about obedience. This was generational theft. That night I didn't sleep. I spread the documents across my apartment floor, connected timelines, mapped phone records, matched rejection dates with his partnership announcements. He wasn't just blacklisting me, he was leveraging my exclusion to strengthen his alliances. Every door he closed on me, he walked through himself. He had turned my career into currency, but here's the thing about silent revenge. It doesn't scream, it waits, and it chooses the battlefield. I didn't storm into his office waving documents. I didn't call the press. I didn't confront him because my grandmother's note echoed in my head. While he is watching doors walk through walls. 3 days later, I stepped into Meridian's 47th floor conference room. Catherine Monroe was already seated. Silver hair, sharp eyes, stillness that commanded respect without demanding it. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "You found the box?" It wasn't a question. I nodded. She slid the folder across the table. "I've been waiting 15 years to meet you." The room went quiet. Executives around the table pretended not to listen. But they were. Catherine leaned forward. "Your grandmother was the most brilliant architect I ever studied under. She never received credit for half her work. She made sure I would never make that mistake." Her gaze sharpened. "Tell me something, Stephanie. Are you here for revenge or for recognition?" I didn't answer immediately. Because that question mattered. I thought about my father sitting at the head of his mahogany table, about Olivia laughing in that diner, about my mother whispering, "He always wins." And then I thought about the building I had submitted. The Resilience Center, designed for people rebuilding their lives after displacement. A structure built around light wells and reinforced communal space. A building that didn't trap, it held. "I'm here," I said finally, "to build something he can't take." Catherine smiled, not warmly, respectfully. "Good," she said, "because this interview isn't about the award." My pulse quickened. "It's about partnership." And then she said the one sentence that changed everything. "Lawson and Partners is bidding for our Harborview Tower project." The air shifted. My father was competing for Meridian's largest development contract of the decade. "And before we award that contract," she continued, "there are certain ethical disclosures we must review." She tapped the folder. My grandmother's folder. My father thought he was walking into a negotiation. He had no idea he was walking into an audit. But here's what I didn't know yet. There was something else in motion. Something my father had already set up. Because while I had been designing at night, he had been planning something bigger than blacklisting. And in 72 hours, he was going to make a move that would force me to choose between silence and detonation. And this time, it wouldn't just cost pride, it would cost blood. 72 hours, that's how long it took for the illusion to shatter. I should have known he wouldn't sit still. Men like my father don't lose quietly. They rearrange the board. And then they flip it. It was 9:17 p.m. I remember because I had just saved the final draft of my revised Meridian proposal. My laptop screen glowed in the dark apartment. My phone buzzed, unknown number. I almost ignored it, almost. "Stephanie Lawson?" a voice asked when I answered. "Yes." "This is Detective Ramirez with Hartford PD. We need you to come down to the station." My stomach dropped. "Why?" There was a pause. "You've been named in a financial misconduct complaint involving Lawson and Partners." Silence. Not shock, not fear, just silence, because I knew exactly who had done it. The station smelled like burnt coffee and old paperwork. The detective was polite, professional, uncomfortable. "Your father alleges you accessed confidential design files and diverted intellectual property." I actually laughed, short, disbelieving. "You mean the designs my grandmother created?" He didn't react. He slid a folder across the table. "Cease and desist order, civil claim draft, potential criminal inquiry." He was trying to frame me for theft of his own stolen work. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about intimidation. This was containment. If he could discredit me legally before Meridian's review, my credibility would collapse. No partnership, no exposure, no leverage. He was preemptively burning my future. I left the station at midnight. The city was quiet, cold. I sat in my car and just stared at the steering wheel. "He always escalates." That's what my mother used to say. "If you push back, he doesn't negotiate, he annihilates." For the first time since finding the deposit box, I felt fear, real fear, because this wasn't emotional warfare anymore. It was legal, public, permanent. I drove straight to my mother's house. The porch light was still on. She opened the door before I knocked. She looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, like the years had been shaving pieces off her. "He filed charges," I said. Her face didn't change. That hurt more than if she'd been shocked. "He warned me," she whispered. "Of course he did." "When?" 2 days ago. He said if you didn't withdraw from Meridian quietly, he'd make sure no firm would ever hire you again." Withdraw quietly. Like I was some inconvenience to be erased. "You didn't tell me," I said. Tears filled her eyes. "I was trying to protect you." Protect me from what? Truth, consequences, or him? I sat at the kitchen table where I used to do homework. Same clock ticking on the wall, same faded cabinets, different reality. "He's afraid," I said finally. My mother looked up. "He's not afraid of you. He's afraid of exposure." Her eyes flickered. And for the first time in my life, I saw something shift in her, not fear, recognition. "You found something, didn't you?" she asked quietly. I didn't answer, I just held her gaze, and she knew. That night I laid everything out for her. The deposit box, the documents, the trust, the letter to Catherine Monroe. She cried, not softly, not politely. She cried like someone who had swallowed silence for decades. "I knew he took credit," she whispered, "but I didn't know she documented it." "She did." My mother looked at me like I was both her daughter and something else entirely. "You can destroy him," she said. There it was, the choice: destroy or dismantle. Those are not the same thing. At 6:02 a.m. my phone buzzed again. Email from Lawson and Partners legal team. Subject: immediate compliance required. They demanded I withdraw from Meridian's partnership review within 24 hours, or they would proceed with formal litigation. It was a calculated move. If I withdrew, they'd drop the claim quietly. If I didn't, they'd make it public. He wanted me cornered, panicked, reactive. But he forgot something. I was done reacting. I forwarded the email to Catherine Monroe with one sentence: "I believe this may interest your ethics committee." Then I attached every document my grandmother had preserved. Phone logs, original drafts, affidavits, everything. If he wanted war in the open, he was about to get sunlight. At 2:14 p.m., Meridian's board issued a formal notice. Lawson and Partners' Harborview Tower bid was suspended pending internal investigation. That was strike one. My father called me at 2:17. I let it ring. He called again, and again. Finally, I answered. "What have you done?" he demanded. His voice wasn't angry, it was tight, controlled. "You escalated," I said calmly. I responded. "You sent private documents to a corporate board." "I sent proof." Silence. The kind that feels like a fuse burning. "You think this makes you powerful?" he asked. "No," I said. "I think it makes me visible." That's when he snapped. "You ungrateful child, everything you have is because of me." Everything I had. The diner shifts, the rejection letters, the police station interview. I almost laughed. "You built your empire on her work," I said quietly. "And then you tried to bury both of us." He didn't deny it. He never does when he thinks denial is beneath him. "You have no idea what you're playing with," he said. "Neither do you," I replied, and I hung up. But here's the part no one talks about in revenge stories. Victory doesn't feel triumphant at first, it feels nauseating. Because when you expose someone powerful, they don't retreat, they calculate, and my father was already calculating. That evening, Olivia posted something. A press release draft leaked anonymously to a design forum. Headline: Yale graduate under investigation for intellectual property fraud. My photo attached. They were smearing me publicly before the investigation even began. Comments flooded in. Speculation, assumptions, career suicide in real time. I stared at my screen, hands shaking. He was going to destroy my reputation to save his. He would burn me to protect his name. And then my phone rang. Catherine Monroe, I assume you've seen the article, she said. Yes. Good, because now we move faster, she explained calmly. Meridian's internal review had already confirmed preliminary inconsistencies in Lawson and Partners' original project credits. They were preparing a formal inquiry, and if my father continued public retaliation, it would strengthen grounds for immediate contract termination. He thought he was intimidating me. He was accelerating his own exposure. Stephanie, Catherine said carefully, this is where most people fold. I leaned back in my chair. I'm not most people. No, she agreed, you're a leaner's granddaughter. For the first time since this began, I felt steady, not angry. Not afraid, aligned. The next 48 hours were brutal. Blogs picked up the fraud narrative. Industry contacts went silent. Former classmates texted cautiously. Is this true? Are you okay? My inbox flooded. My chest tightened. But I didn't respond, because silence can be strategy, and I had something bigger coming. On Friday at 9 a.m., Meridian released an official statement. They announced a comprehensive ethics investigation into Lawson and Partners, specifically citing newly surfaced historical documentation. They did not mention my name, they did not reference the smear campaign. They simply stated, integrity remains the cornerstone of Meridian's partnerships. That was strike two. My father had never been investigated publicly, not once in 40 years until now. He showed up at my apartment that night, unannounced. Of course he did. He looked older, angrier, smaller. You think you've won? He said the second I opened the door. I think the truth is moving, I replied. He stepped closer. You've embarrassed this family. Family, interesting word for someone who weaponized it. You embarrassed it when you stole her work, I said quietly. His jaw tightened. You don't understand the world, he said. I understand it better than you think. He studied me, really studied me, and for the first time I saw it. Uncertainty, not defeat, but doubt, because I wasn't begging, I wasn't apologizing, I wasn't backing down, and he had built his power on the assumption that I would. You're going to regret this, he said finally, maybe. But regret is temporary, erasure is permanent. I already regret staying silent, I answered, and I closed the door. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Meridian's investigation wasn't the only thing unfolding. Because while the ethics committee dug through 4 decades of paperwork, someone else was digging too, a journalist, and she had just found a pattern bigger than my grandmother, bigger than one stolen project, a pattern of appropriation. Silencing, systematic erasure of female architects in the early years of Lawson and Partners. And in 24 hours, that story was going to break nationally. When it did, this wouldn't be a family dispute anymore. It would be an industry reckoning, and my father's name would be at the center of it. The article dropped at 6:03 a.m. I know the exact time because my phone began vibrating nonstop on my nightstand, and for a second I thought it was an earthquake. It wasn't, it was impact. The headline read, "The Architecture of Silence: How One Firm Built an Empire on Uncredited Women." And beneath it, my father's name. The journalist was thorough, painfully thorough. She had uncovered archived blueprints, former employees, sealed settlements, unsigned drafts with familiar handwriting. My grandmother wasn't the only one. There were others, 3 women in the late 70s, 2 in the early 80s. One who had quietly left the industry altogether. Their designs had been presented by senior male partners, their credits minimized, their names buried, and at the center of most of it, Richard Lawson, my father. By 8 a.m., national design publications picked it up. By 9:30, mainstream outlets were quoting it. By noon, Meridian's ethics committee announced a public review hearing, not private, public. And suddenly, this wasn't revenge, it was exposure. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the screen, coffee untouched, heart steady. This wasn't the chaos I had imagined. It felt inevitable. Like a building finally collapsing after decades of structural weakness. Not explosive, just overdue. My phone rang. Catherine Monroe. They've accelerated the hearing, she said calmly. Tomorrow. 10 a.m., that's fast. They're protecting their reputation. And me, I asked. A pause. You're incidental to them, she said honestly, but your documentation is central. I appreciated that. No illusions, no flattery. Just truth. My father called 12 times that morning. I didn't answer. Olivia sent one text. You've gone too far for telling the truth. Interesting. At 3:47 p.m., my mother showed up at my apartment. She hadn't called, she just stood there when I opened the door. I saw it, she said. I know. She stepped inside slowly like she was entering a new world. He's furious, she whispered. I'm sure he is. She looked at me carefully. Are you afraid? I thought about it, about the lawsuits he could still file, the money he could throw at suppression, the allies he might call in. I was, I admitted, but not anymore. She nodded. Something in her posture straightened. Not dramatic, but different. I'm coming tomorrow, she said, to the hearing. That surprised me. He won't like that. She held my gaze. I don't care. And just like that, 40 years of quiet compliance cracked. The next morning, Meridian's headquarters felt different. Press vans outside. Cameras positioned. Reporters scanning faces. I walked through it alone. Medium pace. Back straight. No dramatic music. No slow motion. Just footsteps. Because real revenge isn't theatrical, it's procedural. Inside the conference hall, the board sat elevated. My father sat at the opposite end of the table. Dark suit, controlled expression, but I saw it. The tension in his jaw. He didn't look at me, he looked at the board. As if I were irrelevant, that was his mistake. The ethics chair began calmly. Today we review allegations regarding historical attribution practices within Lawson and Partners. Professional. Neutral, surgical, they presented evidence chronologically, blueprint comparisons, email archives, signed drafts, witness statements, my grandmother's notarized letter, and then they projected a side-by-side image. The Morrison Cultural Center, my father's original presentation slide, and my grandmother's signed preliminary design, dated 2 years earlier. The room went silent, not loud silence, heavy silence. My father finally spoke. Aliner was part of a collaborative team, he said evenly. Credit distribution at the time reflected firm structure. Firm structure. A sanitized phrase for systemic theft. The chair looked unimpressed. Were you aware, she asked, that Aliner Lawson had formally requested co-lead credit prior to the project's award? A document appeared on screen. His signature beneath her request. Denied. He hadn't expected that one. His composure slipped for half a second. That was enough. Then they called me forward, not dramatically, just a nod. Miss Lawson, can you confirm the source of the submitted documentation? I stood. My voice didn't shake. Yes. It was preserved by my grandmother and transferred to me legally through a secured deposit. Did you alter any of the materials? No. Did you receive compensation for their release? No. Why bring them forward now? That question mattered. Not for them, for me. I looked at my father, finally. He met my eyes, and for the first time in my life, he wasn't towering, he was aging. I brought them forward, I said clearly, because silence becomes complicity, not revenge. Not anger, accountability. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Testimonies, cross-references, archived payroll discrepancies, patterns, not just one event, a culture. And when it ended, the board recessed for deliberation. My father stood immediately. He approached me, no cameras nearby, just us. You've humiliated me, he said quietly. No, I replied, you did that yourself. He exhaled sharply. You think Meridian will reward you for this? I don't need a reward. What do you need? I paused. Because this was the truth. I needed you to stop rewriting history. For a second, I saw something flicker, not guilt, not exactly, but recognition. Then it hardened. You're still my daughter, he said. And you're still responsible for what you built. We stood there, 2 architects. One built structures, the other built narratives, only one was collapsing. At 6:12 p.m., Meridian released their decision. Lawson and Partners' Harborview bid was terminated. Pending further investigation, the firm's partnership eligibility was suspended. They would also publicly amend historical project credits where documentation supported revision. Including the Morrison Cultural Center, my grandmother's name would be restored. Officially, permanently, I expected to feel triumphant. I didn't, I felt quiet, because this wasn't the end, it was correction, and correction doesn't scream. It settles, reporters approached as we exited, questions fired. Did you intend to take down your father? Is this a feminist reckoning? Are you pursuing damages? I answered only one. Will you join Meridian? I paused. Maximum retention isn't about shouting, it's about timing. I'm not here to replace anyone, I said evenly. I'm here to build. And I walked away. That night, my father's board forced him into temporary leave. Investors don't tolerate instability. Even self-made empires answer to capital. Olivia's social media went silent. Former partners began issuing carefully worded statements. The firm that once blacklisted me was now scrambling for legal containment. But here's what no one expected. The next morning, Meridian made an announcement. Not about my father, about me. They were launching a new initiative. The Aliner Lawson Design Fellowship, dedicated to restoring credit and opportunity to overlooked architects. Funded in part by a private endowment. $3.4 million, my grandmother's trust, matched by Meridian. They offered me the founding director position, not as charity, as strategy. I stood in my apartment holding the letter. This wasn't revenge anymore, it was architecture, of legacy, of correction, of power rebuilt without theft. And for the first time since that rooftop moment at 12 years old, I understood what my grandmother meant. Power isn't loud, it's positioned. My phone buzzed one last time that evening. My father, I answered, long silence. Then, you've made your point. No, I said calmly, I made hers. He didn't respond, and for once he had nothing left to threaten with, but there was still one final conversation left. One that would determine whether this story ended in division or transformation. Because power reclaimed can harden you, or it can refine you, and I hadn't decided yet which I would choose. Power changes you, not when you gain it. When you realize you never actually lost it. That understanding is quieter than victory, more dangerous than revenge, and far more permanent. 3 weeks after the hearing, Lawson and Partners announced Richard Lawson's formal resignation. Health reasons? That's how empires exit. Clean language, soft headlines, no admission, no apology, just strategic retreat. But the industry knew, and more importantly, history knew. Because Meridian had officially amended the Morrison Cultural Center's authorship. The plaque was removed, recast, reinstalled, Aliner Lawson, lead architect. My grandmother's name in bronze where it always should have been. I stood in front of that building the morning they unveiled it. No press, no cameras, just me and my mother. She touched the new plaque like it might disappear if she blinked. She would have liked this, she whispered. No, I said softly. She would have expected it. And that difference mattered. The Aliner Lawson Design Fellowship launched quietly. Applications flooded in, young architects, mid-career designers overlooked for years, stories that felt painfully familiar. Ideas buried under louder voices, talent dismissed as supporting. We reviewed each submission carefully, not just for brilliance, for resilience, because skill builds structures but resilience builds legacies. Catherine Monroe called me into her office a month later. You've handled this well, she said. I handled it deliberately. She smiled slightly. That's rarer, she leaned back. Harborview Tower is being reassigned. I didn't speak. She studied me. Would you like to submit a proposal? There it was. The project my father had assumed was his. The contract he had nearly secured before everything collapsed. Now open, now available, now unclaimed. This is the moment revenge stories usually climax. The daughter takes the father's throne. The student replaces the master. The empire transfers hands. But real power doesn't chase seats, it chooses foundations. I'll submit, I said evenly, but not to replace him. Then why? She asked. Because I can build it better. Not louder, not bigger, better. The proposal took 6 weeks. No late-night rage, no obsessive comparison. Just disciplined creation. Harborview wasn't just a tower, it was a waterfront redevelopment project. Community access, green infrastructure, public spaces integrated into private architecture. I designed it with transparency, Glass lines where my father preferred concrete. Open terraces where he favored imposing facades. Light, access, acknowledgement, because architecture is philosophy in physical form. And I was done building fortresses. The night before submission, my mother came over with takeout. She watched me review final renderings. "You look different," she said. "How calm." I considered that. "I'm not fighting anymore," she nodded slowly. "You don't hate him?" I paused. That question deserved honesty. "I don't need to." Hatred requires attachment, and I was no longer attached to proving anything, not to him. Not to the industry, not even to the narrative. I had already won the only thing that mattered. Truth restored. Harborview presentations were scheduled over 3 days. Mine was last. Strategic positioning. Let competitors define the baseline, then shift it. When I stepped into the room, it felt different from the ethics hearing. No tension, no accusation, just evaluation. Catherine sat at the center, board members flanking her, investors present. I began simply. No structure should exist that doesn't serve the people around it. No dramatic pauses, no personal references, just clarity. I walked them through the design, environmental modeling, community integration, long-term economic sustainability, transparent sourcing, every detail intentional, every line accountable, because accountability had become my blueprint. Halfway through, one investor interrupted. "Your design reduces private luxury square footage by 8%. That impacts revenue." "Yes," I said calmly, short-term, silence. "But it increases public engagement and long-term district value by 12%. I slid forward the projections. "Data, not emotion. You're betting on legacy," he said. "I'm betting on sustainability." And sustainability always outlives spectacle. When the presentation ended, there was no applause. Serious rooms don't applaud, they assess. I stepped out into the hallway, sat down, waited. 30 minutes later, Catherine opened the door. "Walk with me," she said. We didn't speak until we reached the window overlooking the harbor. "You know," she began, "your father would have maximized profit." "I know, you're maximizing impact." "Yes." She studied the water below. "Do you regret exposing him?" There it was again. The question people keep asking when accountability disrupts power. "No," I said quietly. "I regret that it was necessary." She nodded. "Good answer." Then she extended her hand. "Congratulations, Stephanie." Harborview was mine. Not inherited, not seized, earned. When the announcement went public, reactions were divided. Some called it poetic justice. Some called it strategic PR. Some called it calculated revenge. They were all wrong. It wasn't revenge. It was correction followed by construction, two very different energies. One destroys imbalance. The other builds alignment. My father didn't attend the groundbreaking ceremony. I didn't expect him to, but he did send a letter, handwritten. Brief, "I underestimated you." That was it. No apology, no confession, just acknowledgement. For him, that was seismic. I didn't respond, not out of cruelty, but because closure doesn't require commentary. Months passed. Harborview began rising from the waterfront. Steel beams against open sky, glass reflecting sunrise, each phase documented, each contractor credited transparently, each contributor visible. Because visibility had become non-negotiable. The fellowship's first cohort visited the site during early framing. One of them, a young architect named Leela, stood beside me watching cranes lift support columns. "They said I wasn't leadership material," she admitted quietly. I smiled. "They said that to my grandmother too." She looked up at the structure. "Does it ever stop hurting?" I considered the question carefully. "Yes," I said. "When you stop trying to prove and start choosing to build." That's the pivot. Proving is reactive, building is sovereign. The day the Aliner Lawson Fellowship awarded its first completed project, my mother stood beside me on stage. The plaque behind us carried both names, not because I demanded it, because the board voted unanimously. Legacy shared, not stolen. My mother leaned toward me as applause filled the hall. She would be proud. I smiled softly. She would say, "Of course." Years from now, people will look at Harborview Tower and see a building. They won't see the diner shifts, the police station interview, the smear articles, the ethics hearing, the deposit box, but I will. Because those weren't obstacles, they were structural tests, and the structure held. If you're listening to this right now, maybe you've been erased, overlooked, minimized. Maybe someone rewrote your contribution, took credit, closed doors. Blacklisted your name quietly. Here's what I learned. You don't storm the fortress, you audit the foundation, you don't scream for recognition, you document, you position, you build something they can't claim. And when the moment comes, you don't detonate, you reveal, then you construct. I never wanted to destroy my father, I wanted history corrected, because revenge burns fast. But restored truth, that lasts generations. Power isn't about domination, it's about alignment between truth and visibility. When those two match, no one can erase you. Not permanently. The rooftop where my grandmother handed me that brass key still exists. I visited it last week. The city looked different, or maybe I did. I stood there quietly, wind against my face. And for the first time since I was 12, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something. I felt complete. Not because I won, but because I built, and no one can take that, not anymore.